The Eastern Front in the winter of 1941 was a world locked in ice. Snow stretched endlessly, turning forests and villages into white deserts. German soldiers trudged through it, their boots sinking into frozen mud, faces streaked with frost, eyes hollow with exhaustion. Every breath was a struggle, every movement an act of sheer will. Supply lines faltered, vehicles froze in place, and radios crackled with static as commanders grappled with a merciless, silent adversary, the winter itself. For the Wehrmacht, the Eastern Front was meant to be a swift conquest. Blitzkrieg had carried them across Poland and France with astonishing speed, leaving panic and disarray in their wake. But the vast expanse of Russia offered no shortcuts. Roads vanished beneath snowdrifts, rivers became icy barricades, and every mile forward demanded immense human and mechanical effort. Soldiers suffered frostbite so severe that fingers and toes were lost. Engines sputtered and froze. Ammunition hardened in the cold, refusing to feed into the guns. Morale was fraying as rapidly as boots on frozen feet. Yet in the midst of this frozen nightmare, a new variable appeared, one that would redefine armored warfare: the T-34. German intelligence had heard rumors of Soviet tanks, but expectations were modest. Reports described them as slow, cumbersome, and ill-suited to combat in the brutal cold. In the minds of many German officers, the snow was an ally. It would bog down the Soviet machines just as it had crippled trucks, half-tracks, and even motorcycles. And then, the first T-34s appeared. The soldiers who saw them first could scarcely believe their eyes. A tank gliding over snow with an ease that defied reason, its wide tracks distributing weight in a way no German vehicle could match. The armor, sloped, angular, and impossibly thick for its size, reflected winter sunlight like a shield forged from the very essence of survival. The gun barrel gleamed, but it was the mobility that stunned the observers most. These were not the lumbering, fragile machines the Wehrmacht had expected. These were predators built for the cold, designed to endure what would break lesser tanks. Witnessing a T-34 emerging from a snowbank, a German soldier reportedly whispered in disbelief, "How can anything survive this winter?" It was a question that echoed through the ranks, through the forested plains and frozen villages, through the hearts of men who had believed themselves masters of the battlefield. The winter had been an enemy they understood. Now, it had become the stage for a far more terrifying force. In that moment, the Eastern Front transformed. It was no longer just a battle of men against nature, or men against men. It was a confrontation between ingenuity and expectation. A silent lesson that the most dangerous threats are often the ones you do not anticipate. And for the Germans, the T-34 was about to teach them, in the harshest way imaginable, that survival in war often depends on seeing beyond the obvious, adapting faster than your opponent, and respecting forces, mechanical, human, or environmental, that seem at first insurmountable. The stage was set. Winter raged and the T-34 waited. On paper, the T-34 seemed unremarkable, an armored vehicle like countless others rolling off assembly lines around the world. But appearances, as history would soon reveal, were dangerously deceptive. Beneath its steel shell lay a marriage of innovation and brutal practicality. A design born not from aesthetics or tradition, but from necessity, a weapon forged to survive the harshest winters, the muddiest roads, and the most unforgiving battles. The first feature that stunned German soldiers was its sloped armor. Unlike the flat-faced tanks of the Wehrmacht, the T-34's armor was angled to deflect shells rather than absorb them head-on. This simple geometric principle transformed a medium tank into a near-impenetrable fortress, capable of shrugging off rounds that would pierce the heaviest German Panzerfes. In a war where survival often depended on the thickness of one's armor, the T-34's design was a revelation. Protection engineered not through weight, but through intelligence. Equally vital were the wide, robust tracks. Whereas German tanks struggled over frozen swamps and snow-choked roads, the T-34 seemed to float across the landscape. Its tracks distributed weight evenly, preventing it from sinking into soft ground or becoming trapped in snowdrifts. For soldiers trudging beside it, the tank's effortless mobility was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Roads, rivers, and frozen fields ceased to be obstacles. The T-34 turned them into mere terrain. Under the hood, the tank's diesel engine added another layer of resilience. Unlike the gasoline engines in most German panzers, the T-34's diesel power plant was less prone to fire and more reliable in extreme cold. Fuel would gel in other tanks, immobilizing crews in the middle of snow-laden forests. The T-34, however, roared to life even in sub-zero temperatures, a mechanical predator perfectly adapted to its environment. And yet, German intelligence had dismissed it. Reports labeled it as slow, fragile, and unsophisticated, a marginal player in the armored theater. Commanders expected that superior tactics, coordination, and firepower would easily neutralize it. They did not anticipate that this ordinary tank would carry within it a disruptive force, a lesson that would soon echo across frozen battlefields. The brilliance of the T-34 lay in its simplicity. It did not rely on complex systems prone to failure. It was sturdy, fast, and designed with the soldier in mind, built to endure, to advance, to outlast. And in this it represented more than a piece of machinery. It was a symbol of adaptation, of understanding one's environment, of questioning conventional assumptions. The Eastern Front, already a crucible of human endurance, was about to witness a paradox, a modest tank that would not merely participate in battle, but rewrite the rules of war. Its arrival marked the beginning of a reckoning for those who underestimated it, a lesson as brutal as the Russian winter itself. By the winter of 1941, the German Wehrmacht carried the weight of victories like armor around its own confidence. From the Blitzkrieg triumphs in Poland to the rapid conquests of France, German soldiers believed themselves masters of modern warfare. Their panzer divisions, sleek, fast, and deadly, had proven time and again that precision, coordination, and training could overcome almost any obstacle. On the Eastern Front, they expected no different. The soldiers trudging through the snow, frost-bitten and weary, clung to this pride. Their tanks, heavily armed and well-drilled, were seen as instruments of inevitability. Commanders whispered strategies of encirclement and annihilation, confident that any Soviet resistance would crumble under the weight of German engineering and discipline. There was a sense of invincibility, of a formula perfected through years of campaigning. The snow, they thought, was a minor inconvenience, a backdrop to the theater of their inevitable victory. But confidence, even in war, can be a dangerous companion. It narrows perception, blinds men to nuance, and dismisses threats that do not conform to expectation. German soldiers saw Soviet tanks as slow, poorly armored, and mechanically fragile. Reports filtered through intelligence channels, often exaggerated or misinterpreted, reinforced this belief. In their minds, the enemy was predictable. What they did not see, what they could not imagine, was the silent genius of the T-34 waiting in the snow-laden forests and frozen plains. As the German panzers advanced, their tracks carving through icy mud and snow, the landscape itself became a subtle adversary. Every frozen river crossing, every snowbank, every half-hidden ditch was a challenge that German engineers had underestimated. For them, winter was merely an inconvenience. For the T-34, it was a playground. Wide tracks, sloped armor, and a diesel engine designed to endure meant that the tank could glide where German vehicles bogged down, could appear where the enemy expected impossibility, could strike when and where it seemed least likely. In the moments before the first confrontation, there was a strange quiet, an almost cinematic tension. German crews, confident and battle-hardened, moved with mechanical precision, unaware that the snow which had immobilized their vehicles would now amplify the T-34's advantages. Each crunch beneath their boots, each icy gust of wind, was part of a setting that would soon betray them. Their overconfidence was a blindfold, their pride a leash. And then the first T-34 appeared, emerging from the white haze of the winter landscape. What the German soldiers had expected to be slow, clunky, and vulnerable now moved with shocking fluidity. Its armor deflected rounds that should have ended it. Its tracks chewed through snowdrifts effortlessly. Their pride, their training, their expectations, all of it was suddenly insufficient. The landscape they had underestimated became the instrument of their surprise. In this moment, history began to pivot. Overconfidence, that subtle and often invisible enemy, met innovation perfectly adapted to environment. The stage was set not for another predictable engagement, but for a lesson in humility. The snow, silent and impartial, had chosen a side, and it was not the side that German soldiers had imagined. The morning of the breakthrough began like any other winter day on the Eastern Front. Snow fell in thick sheets, blanketing the landscape in white, muffling sound, and transforming forests into ghostly corridors. German units moved cautiously, tanks and trucks laboring through the frozen quagmire, tracks spinning uselessly in deep drifts. Commanders cursed the elements, believing the harsh winter would slow any Soviet counterattack. Yet, in the silence, something stirred, a force they could neither predict nor fully comprehend. From the tree line, A low rumble emerged. At first it was dismissed as distant artillery or the wind shifting over the plains. But as the sound grew, soldiers froze, scanning the white horizon. Then they saw them, T-34 tanks advancing with a fluidity that defied expectation. Wide tracks crushed snow effortlessly, engines roaring steadily despite the sub-zero cold. Unlike German panzers that struggled, choked, and ground to a halt, these machines moved as if the snow were nothing more than a paved road. The reaction among the German troops was immediate and visceral. Disbelief twisted into alarm. A lieutenant reportedly slammed his fist against a tank hatch, shouting orders that fell on deaf ears as his men simply stared. These were not the slow, cumbersome vehicles intelligence had warned about. These were predators of steel and ingenuity, built to thrive where others would fail. Sloped armor gleamed under the winter sun, and the long barrels of their guns swept across the field with mechanical precision. As the T-34s pressed forward, German soldiers realized their positions. Their strategies and even their pride were in jeopardy. The snow, once considered a defensive ally, now became a stage for the tank's unstoppable advance. Entire units found themselves outmaneuvered in moments that seemed suspended in time, sledged trucks floundering in drifts, panzer divisions immobilized, artillery crews scrambling to find firing positions. Every attempt to intercept or halt the T-34s failed. These machines did not merely cross the snow, they dominated it. Witness accounts later described a surreal sense of helplessness. The tank seemed to float, moving with the inevitability of a storm, reshaping the battlefield simply by being present. Where German confidence had been absolute, shock and confusion took root. Men who had marched hundreds of kilometers across Europe, veterans of countless engagements, now confronted an enemy that defied expectation and exploited the very environment they had assumed would favor them. In the chaos, a lesson became painfully clear. The T-34's brilliance was not in flashy weaponry or overwhelming numbers. It lay in adaptation, in the seamless integration of design, terrain, and survival instinct. The snow, once a backdrop for struggle, now amplified the tank's power, turning a winter battlefield into a theater of revelation. For the German troops, the first snowstorm breakthrough was more than a tactical failure. It was a psychological jolt, a profound reminder that war is won not just by strength but by foresight, preparation, and the courage to embrace what seems impossible. In the bitter cold of the Eastern Front, machinery often failed long before men did. Engines refused to turn, gears froze, and tracks sank helplessly into icy mud. For German forces, winter was a merciless equalizer, one that revealed the limits of engineering and the fragility of even the most celebrated panzer divisions. Yet the T-34 moved through this frozen world as if untouched by the elements, a testament to meticulous design and visionary engineering. At the heart of the tank's winter dominance were its wide tracks. Unlike the narrow, heavy wheels of German panzers, the T-34's tracks spread the vehicle's weight over a much larger surface area. This simple innovation transformed frozen swamps, deep snow, and treacherous ice from barriers into pathways. Where German tanks sank, skidded, and stalled, the T-34 pressed forward. Soldiers who had once laughed at the notion of a Soviet armored threat now watched in stunned silence as these machines traversed terrain deemed impassable, leaving trails of overturned snow and shattered assumptions in their wake. Equally revolutionary was the sloped armor. German shells, optimized for frontal attacks on flat surfaces, glanced off at impossible angles. The T-34 did not rely solely on thickness for protection. It used geometry itself as a defensive weapon. Every encounter reinforced a simple, terrifying truth. Hitting the tank did not guarantee destruction. In a world where survival depended on the reliability of one's own weapons, the T-34 rendered standard German tactics obsolete, forcing commanders to rethink the very nature of armored engagement. Under the hood, the tank's diesel engine provided a final decisive edge. Gasoline engines in German panzers often froze in temperatures plunging below -30 degrees Celsius. Fuel lines clogged, radiators cracked, and machinery groaned in protest. The T-34's diesel engine, however, was built for endurance. Designed to ignite in the coldest conditions, it delivered steady power where others faltered. German crews, watching their own tanks falter and stall, could only marvel at the ease with which the T-34 powered through snow, ice, and mud, seemingly immune to the forces that had immobilized them. This combination of tracks, armor, and engine created more than just a tank. It created a force multiplier, a machine that amplified its surroundings rather than being hindered by them. The battlefield itself became an accomplice to the T-34. turning obstacles into advantages and transforming the harshest winter into an arena of tactical supremacy. For the German soldiers, each moment of observation was a blow to their confidence. Years of invincibility, honed through campaigns across Europe, crumbled under the relentless efficiency of Soviet engineering. What they had assumed was fragility revealed itself as brilliance. Every inch of ground gained by the T-34 was a lesson in adaptation, ingenuity, and the relentless power of preparation. In this frozen theater, the T-34 was not merely a vehicle. It was a symbol. It demonstrated that survival and victory were not born of arrogance or brute force alone. They were the rewards of foresight, design, and a deep understanding of one's environment. The illusion of German invincibility had been shattered, and a new era of armored warfare had begun, one where the unseen advantages, the mechanical subtleties, and the intelligent integration of environment and machine dictated who would thrive and who would falter. On the morning of the breakthrough, the German High Command expected control, precision, and order. Panzer commanders had charted every advance, every flanking maneuver, every artillery strike. They had anticipated the snow, calculated the resistance, and trusted in the superior training of their men. Yet within hours all assumptions were shattered. From command posts perched on frozen ridges, officers watched the unexpected, T-34 tanks bypassing fortifications, cutting through flanks and exploiting terrain that should have immobilized them. Trenches meant to halt an advance became mere suggestions. Anti-tank emplacements, carefully constructed to cover predictable approaches, were rendered irrelevant as the Soviet tanks simply moved where no German gun could reach. Each new report, delivered in hurried, breathless bursts over frost-laden radios, deepened the growing panic. It was not just the tank's physical presence that unnerved the commanders, it was the speed of adaptation. Where German doctrine demanded predictable patterns, the T-34s acted unpredictably yet methodically, combining mobility, armor, and firepower in ways that defied conventional analysis. Commanders who had orchestrated victories across Western Europe now faced a force that made their most trusted tactics obsolete. Every attempt to redirect units to seal off flanks or to anticipate movements failed. The battlefield itself seemed to conspire with the T-34, turning snow, ice, and frozen rivers into conduits for Soviet strategy. Reports filtered in from the front lines, entire panzer units immobilized in snowdrifts, artillery crews scrambling to realign, infantry pinned down by a threat they could not foresee. Confidence evaporated. Experienced officers, some decorated for daring and cunning, were forced to confront a bitter truth. The war they thought they knew was no longer predictable. The T-34 had not only breached the front, it had breached their assumptions, the very foundation of German command. The psychological impact rippled through every level of the hierarchy. Staff officers pored over maps, redrawing positions again and again, searching for a pattern, a weakness, a vulnerability that simply did not exist. The snow, once expected to slow the enemy, now amplified the T-34's advantage. German commanders began to understand with mounting dread that the enemy had integrated design, terrain, and tactics in a way they had not anticipated. Each movement of the tank seemed preordained, an embodiment of strategy rather than chance. In the chaos, lessons emerged, albeit painfully. Victory was no longer guaranteed by training or reputation alone. It depended on understanding the environment, respecting the ingenuity of opponents, and acknowledging that the most dangerous forces are often those you do not see coming. For the panzer commanders, the shock of the T-34's breakthrough was not just a tactical failure. It was a confrontation with humility, a reminder that war rewards the prepared, the adaptable, and the imaginative. By midday, the initial shock had turned into a slow, gnawing realization. The battlefield had changed forever. What had been planned as a calculated advance had become chaos, driven by the relentless efficiency of a machine designed not just to fight, but to survive, adapt, and dominate. The T-34 was no longer an underdog. It was the new standard. And German command had just been forced to reckon with a truth colder and harder than any winter snow. Ingenuity, when paired with environment and necessity, is unstoppable. The Eastern Front in winter was a world of extremes. Bitter cold that burned exposed skin, snowdrifts taller than men, and silence broken only by the distant howl of wind. For German soldiers, each day was a struggle for survival. Boots froze to the ground, weapons jammed, and every breath felt like inhaling shards of ice. Yet amid this desolate landscape, another sound emerged, one that would haunt memory long after the snow had melted, the crunch of T-34 tracks moving with terrifying purpose. Accounts from the front line paint a vivid picture of shock and disbelief. One soldier recalled huddling behind a frozen embankment, peering through frosted goggles as the T-34 emerged from a blizzard. "It moved as if the snow didn't exist," he said years later, voice trembling. "Every time we thought it would stop, it didn't. Every time we aimed, it shrugged off our shells. I had never seen anything like it." Another infantryman described the surreal sight of a tank sliding down a hill, snow cascading from its tracks, crushing frozen earth that had trapped his own unit only moments before. Fear and awe existed side by side. The T-34 was not just a machine. It was a force that reshaped the environment, turning impossible terrain into a highway for destruction. Soldiers spoke of the psychological toll, how even moments of concealment offered little solace when the enemy could appear from snowbanks and forest lines, their advance steady, inexorable, unbroken. The fear was tangible, a weight pressing down as heavily as frostbite on exposed hands and feet. Yet within that fear lay a grudging respect. Veteran troops, hardened by years of European campaigns, acknowledged the brilliance of the design. The tank's sloped armor, wide tracks, and diesel engine created not just a weapon, but an idea, a principle of survival and adaptation. Even as German soldiers scrambled to respond, they recognized that this was a machine born of necessity and ingenuity, one that demanded admiration even as it inspired dread. Stories from the front line often end the same way, a mixture of disbelief, exhaustion, and quiet reflection. Men who had believed themselves invincible now faced a stark reality. War was no longer a contest of pride and training alone. It was a test of perception, adaptability, and humility. The T-34, relentless in snow and ice, forced them to confront not just the enemy, but the limits of their own assumptions. In the frozen chaos, a lesson crystallized. The environment and the unseen advantages of innovation could determine the outcome of battle, sometimes more decisively than courage or firepower. And for those who survived to tell the tale, the image of the T-34 plowing through snow would linger forever, a haunting reminder of ingenuity made tangible, and the price of underestimating forces both mechanical and human. In the bitter months following the initial shock of the T-34, a remarkable transformation took shape on the Eastern Front. The German advance, once seemingly unstoppable, began to falter, not because of a lack of bravery or firepower, but because of Soviet ingenuity and adaptation. The T-34, once underestimated, became the cornerstone of a strategic revival that would alter the course of the campaign. The brilliance of the tank lay not merely in individual encounters, but in design married to mass production. While German forces relied heavily on superior tactics and individual unit prowess, the Soviets embraced a system that allowed the T-34 to be produced in overwhelming numbers. Each tank was reliable, sturdy, and simple enough to be repaired in the field, even by crews under extreme duress. This meant that losses were not catastrophic, they were temporary setbacks. The machinery itself became a tool of resilience, allowing the Red Army to absorb blows, reorganize, and strike back with a velocity that the Germans could neither anticipate nor counter effectively. Innovation, in this context, proved more decisive than brute strength. The T-34 was not the heaviest, fastest, or most intimidating tank on paper, but its creators had understood a profound truth. Adaptation to environment and purpose often outweighs sheer force. Wide tracks conquered frozen terrain, sloped armor deflected enemy shells, and diesel engines ensured mobility in sub-zero temperatures. German panzers, designed for speed and precision under predictable conditions, were ill-equipped to face such versatile machines in the chaos of Russian winters. Every engagement highlighted a lesson the Wehrmacht had ignored. Rigid reliance on assumptions, no matter how battle-tested, could be fatal when confronted with thoughtful engineering and adaptability. By late 1941, Soviet forces began to leverage this advantage strategically. T-34s were deployed en masse to exploit weak points in German lines, bypass entrenched positions, and spearhead counterattacks. These operations were not haphazard. They were a demonstration of foresight, coordination, and the integration of innovation into doctrine. Where brute force had failed to deliver decisive victories, clever design and resourcefulness succeeded, turning the tide of battle inch by inch. The psychological impact on German troops was profound. Units that had once viewed victory as inevitable now faced relentless, coordinated pressure from a machine that seemed almost impervious to the conditions they had assumed would favor them. Pride and experience counted for little against a combination of preparation, ingenuity, and relentless application of innovation. In retrospect, the T-34's story offers a timeless insight. Raw power alone rarely guarantees success. What endures is intelligent design, adaptability, and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom. On the frozen Eastern Front, the Soviets demonstrated that innovation can outlast strength, that preparation and insight can overcome initial disaster, and that a machine, conceived with understanding of both human and environmental factors, can reshape the destiny of armies. The T-34 was not just a tank, it was a lesson etched in steel. In war, as in life, those who innovate and adapt do not merely survive, they define the battlefield. The story of the T-34 is more than a tale of engineering marvels or battlefield dominance. It is a story of human perception, assumption, and the cost of failing to adapt. The German troops, so confident after years of European campaigns, had approached the Eastern Front with a sense of inevitability. They relied on experience, training, and the superiority of their panzer divisions, expecting that victory was a matter of skill applied against predictable resistance. Yet the brutal winter, the vastness of the terrain, and the ingenuity of the Soviet forces shattered those assumptions. The first lesson is clear: environment cannot be underestimated. German strategies were conceived in classrooms and training grounds, far from the frozen plains of Russia. Vehicles and tactics optimized for speed, coordination, and mechanized efficiency faltered in snow, mud, and ice. The T-34, by contrast, was conceived with these very conditions in mind. Its wide tracks, diesel engine, and sloped armor were not luxuries. They were necessities, tools for survival in an environment that would have immobilized conventional designs. The lesson was simple, yet profound. When the context changes, even the most formidable force can be rendered ineffective. Overconfidence compounded the problem. Years of rapid victories had instilled a sense of mastery, a belief that German training and technology could overcome any obstacle. This pride blinded commanders and soldiers alike to possibilities beyond their assumptions. The T-34, initially dismissed as slow or fragile, exploited that blindness. Each breakthrough, each seemingly effortless advance, was a stark reminder that overestimation of one's own capabilities can be as dangerous as underestimating the enemy. But perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in adaptation itself. Strategy is not a static formula. It is a living process that must respond to reality rather than dictate it. German forces failed not because of individual errors or bravery of the enemy alone, but because they did not adjust quickly to circumstances they had underestimated. The T-34 exemplified adaptation in its purest form. Design, production, and deployment aligned seamlessly with terrain, climate, and purpose. It moved where others stalled, survived when others perished, and forced the enemy to confront a reality they had ignored. Philosophically, the T-34 teaches that success is as much about perception and flexibility as it is about force. Understanding context, physical, strategic, and psychological, is critical. Innovation is not measured only by raw strength, but by how effectively it leverages constraints, anticipates challenges, and transforms apparent disadvantages into advantages. On the frozen Eastern Front, the Soviets demonstrated that the unseen factors, terrain, winter, ingenuity, often carry greater weight than numerical superiority or battlefield experience. For future generations, the T-34 is a symbol of this principle. It reminds us that in war, business, or life, rigidity and pride are liabilities, insight and adaptation are survival, and in the silence of snow-covered plains, where steel met frost and expectation met ingenuity, the German troops learned a lesson written in ice and iron, that the most decisive advantage is often the one you cannot see until it moves. The T-34 did more than survive the frozen chaos of the Eastern Front. It redefined armored warfare. Its legacy is not measured solely in the battles it won or the territory it helped reclaim, but in the enduring lessons it offers about resilience, design, and the marriage of human ingenuity with the unforgiving environment. Across decades, historians, engineers, and strategists have returned to the snow-crushed fields of 1941 to study the tank that surprised the world, a reminder that true power lies in preparation. Foresight and adaptation. For German soldiers, the T-34 was a revelation that began as disbelief and ended as a lesson in humility. Experienced panzer crews, hardened by years of conquest, were confronted with a machine that seemed unstoppable. Wide tracks that conquered impossible terrain, sloped armor that deflected rounds, and diesel engines that refused to falter in sub-zero conditions. Each encounter undermined the assumptions of superiority, forcing commanders to rethink strategy, question doctrine, and confront the limits of brute force. It was a harsh, sometimes painful education, but one that echoed far beyond the frozen forests and snow-laden plains of Russia. Yet the T-34's impact was not only tactical, it was philosophical. The tank embodied the principle that resilience and thoughtful engineering can overcome obstacles that appear insurmountable. It was a product of understanding, anticipating, and mastering constraints rather than ignoring them. Where the Germans relied on established methods and rigid doctrine, the Soviets demonstrated that adaptability and intelligent design could tilt the scales of history. In the machinery of the T-34, the harsh lessons of winter, terrain, and combat converged into a vehicle that symbolized the power of insight. Applied with precision, the influence of the T-34 extended far beyond the Eastern Front. Its design informed armored strategy for decades, inspiring engineers worldwide to prioritize mobility, survivability, and simplicity. Mass production techniques prove that quantity and quality need not be mutually exclusive when guided by intelligent planning. Across the globe, tank designers studied the T-34 not merely as a weapon of war, but as a blueprint for innovation under extreme conditions. Its legacy became a reminder that foresight, adaptability, and resilience often determine outcomes more decisively than raw strength or intimidation. Today, the T-34 occupies a place not only in museums and history books, but also in the collective imagination. It represents ingenuity forged under adversity, a testament to the principle that preparation and understanding can turn disadvantage into advantage. The snow-crushing tank is a symbol of endurance, a mechanical answer to one of history's harshest challenges, and a lesson that transcends war, the forces we cannot immediately see, environment, design, and insight, often decide the outcome long before direct confrontation occurs. In the end, the T-34's story is timeless. It reminds us that obstacles, no matter how formidable, are rarely insurmountable when met with innovation, foresight, and unyielding resilience. From the frozen forests of the Eastern Front to modern strategic thinking, the legacy of the T-34 endures, a machine of steel that shattered assumptions, changed the rules of warfare, and left behind a lesson as enduring as the winter snow it once conquered.